Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at some really interesting source material. It digs into how certain historical figures tackled strategic engagement, entering new areas, systematic district work, basically.
That's right. And the sources zero in on Jesus and the Apostle Paul, looking at their methods across places like, well, ancient Judea, Galilee, Samaria, even further out into Asia Minor and Greece.
And our mission here for this deep dive is to really pull out the main principles, maybe even some surprising details from how they operated back then.
Yeah, and see what lessons that might hold for us, today when we think about engaging with our own communities or maybe our workplaces, anywhere we want to connect or, well, make a difference.
You'll find some intriguing stories in here, things that kind of make you think.
Definitely. Like there's this mention of someone who managed to bring their entire village on board after just a 2-day visit.
Wow. Or how, a single chat, maybe somewhere totally normal, like a shopping mall, could potentially open up a whole network of relationships.
Exactly. Those unexpected connections.
Okay, so let's dive in then. One of the first things that really jumps out from the material is that this wasn't just, random wandering. There was a clear, deliberate focus on specific geographic areas. Districts. I mean, it struck me how Paul, for example, the sources credit him with opening up something like 9 distinct provinces or districts. And that was just on his second major journey.
And it wasn't aimless, like you said. The material really emphasizes this sense of direction, often described as being led by the Spirit.
Right.
He moved through Arabia, Syria, Cyprus, different parts of Galatia, Macedonia, Achaia.
Yeah.
Even reaching towards Illyricum. He'd revisit places, sure, like Galatia. But also, and this is fascinating, sometimes the Spirit would actually prevent him from going into certain areas.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, before redirecting him. The most famous example, probably, is that vision in Troas that pointed him towards Macedonia.
And it seems Paul wasn't just inventing the strategic way of working. The material suggests he was really following the pattern Jesus himself set.
Absolutely. Jesus spent a pretty significant chunk of time, the source mentions, about 18 months, just laying groundwork in his early Judean ministry.
Building relationships, establishing a base, that sort of thing.
Exactly. But then you see change. Famously, the text says he had to go through Samaria.
Had to.
Right. The source implies that wasn't just about the travel route. It suggests divine intention.
Yeah.
And that led to this really pivotal encounter, which resulted in, well, a very rapid multiplication of followers there.
Right. And then after Samaria, he shifts his base, moves it up to Capernaum in Galilee.
Where he already had connections, right? And a following.
Exactly. And the material points out he didn't set up some formal institution. It was more relational, often working from a home base similar to Judea.
And a core part of his strategy seems to have been this intense investment in his team.
Yeah.
The 12 disciples.
Yes.
And building out from there. The source gives this really powerful example. He takes that team for just a day trip, basically, to Decapolis.
Which was totally new territory, right? On the other side of the lake.
Completely unentered. And there, this man he heals becomes the key figure. Jesus actually leaves him there, in his own district where people knew him. He essentially commissions him on the spot to be the local point person for multiplication.
That's incredibly efficient, empowering a local right away.
Yeah, so when you look at Jesus' ministry, which was relatively short in public terms, the sources show him cultivating work in all these distinct areas. Judea, Samaria, Galilee, Decapolis, even Phoenicia, Gaulonitis, Perea.
So definitely not a scattergun approach. It looks very intentional, engaging specific, diverse regions.
Which brings us to a really critical point the sources make. How do they actually get into these new districts?
The entry strategy.
Right, and the material highlights this, well, fascinating difference in pacing. Sometimes they spent quite a lot of time, building relationships, setting foundations. But other times, areas opened up remarkably quickly.
Yeah, you see that longer-term investment, like Jesus in Judea and Galilee, or Paul spending, 18 months equipping teams in Corinth. That deep work was obviously vital.
But then, the contrast is stark. Jesus in Samaria, only 2 days.
Just 2 days.
Or maybe just hours in Decapolis. Paul in Philippi, a relatively short time. And Thessalonica. Maybe as little as 2 weeks.
So how did they manage that rapid entry?
The sources point again and again to one key factor, finding and connecting with what they term people of peace.
Okay, this feels like a core insight. These people of peace, they weren't just like anyone who offered them a cup of tea, were they?
No, not at all. The material's pretty clear. These were individuals who were, yes, receptive to the message or the person, but crucially, they were also known, respected, often influential within their existing social networks.
Ah, so it's about their position within the community, too.
Exactly. And the impact these individuals had was often disproportionately large.
Right. Think about those examples you mentioned. The woman in Samaria, she starts off resistant, but after one conversation.
She brings her whole village back to meet Jesus. Or the man at Decapolis, the one who'd been demon-possessed. He potentially gathers, 4,000 men plus others, all waiting for Jesus when he returns.
Wow.
Then you have Lydia in Philippi, a businesswoman. Her openness leads to her whole household getting involved, and her home becomes the base.
And the Philippian jailer, too, another key person. His whole family joins the movement after just one dramatic night.
For Jason in Thessalonica, opening his home and his network. It's a recurring pattern.
So the real insight here seems to be that finding one single, well-connected, receptive person could be the doorway, the leverage point for engaging a whole district much faster.
Yes. It allows for that rapid entry we sometimes see. It's just, exponentially more effective than trying to reach every single person individually.
It really shifts the focus, doesn't it, away from maybe mass campaigns.
Towards identifying and working through the existing social fabric, through these key individuals.
Okay, so if finding these people of peace is that crucial, how did they actually do it? How did they find them? The sources seem to outline a few practical methods.
Yeah, they do. The first one the material highlights is basically going where spiritual interest might already exist.
Makes sense.
So Jesus went to the Jordan River, where John the Baptist had already gathered a crowd, people seeking something.
Okay.
And Paul, when he entered a new city, where did he often start?
The synagogue.
Right. A place where people were already meeting, interested in monotheism, talking about Scripture. It's a natural starting point.
And what if there wasn't a synagogue? Like in Philippi?
Good question. The source notes they looked for other places where people might gather for prayer or spiritual reasons. That's how they found Lydia and the women down by the river.
Okay. So the principle is find the existing openings. Where's there already a connection point around deeper questions or needs?
Exactly. And the sources suggest that even today, looking at existing community initiatives could be literacy classes, youth centers, groups helping the homeless, recognizing that these often have established relationships, established leaders.
Who might be those people of peace?
Precisely. Instead of always trying to build something brand new from the ground up, connect with what's already there.
And what's interesting is how those initiatives often naturally bring together diverse people, right? Including community leaders or people open to help or new ideas.
Yeah, exactly. Prime candidates for being those receptive, connected individuals.
Which connects nicely to the second method the source talks about, deliberately following existing relational streams.
Right. Using the connections you already have. The source gives examples like Paul and Barnabas going to Cyprus. Why Cyprus?
Barnabas had family there.
Exactly. He had connections. Or think about Paul planting churches directly within the household, the existing social networks of people like Lydia or the jailer.
It builds on what's already established.
And that model is still incredibly powerful. The material shares some modern stories, too, like a pastor reaching a new village in Papua New Guinea just by visiting his brother who lived there. And a church starts right in the brother's home.
Simple but effective.
Or in a big city like Melbourne, making intentional connections with people who live out in the suburbs but work downtown, and following those existing ties back out into a new urban district.
Okay, so existing interest, relational streams. What's the third method?
The third one is about prayerfully seeking out those specific key people, people of peace.
So more proactive seeking.
Yeah. Remember Jesus having to go through Samaria. That implies divine guidance, doesn't it?
Right.
Leading him to that specific woman.
Right. It wasn't accidental.
And the Force shares a modern example of this, too. A guy named Dave Lawton, prayer walking through a shopping mall in Melbourne, just asking God, show me who to talk to.
In a shopping mall. Okay.
Yeah. And this leads to a seemingly random conversation with an elderly Sikh gentleman, which then opened up a whole stream of relationships with Sikh families who became interested in reading scripture together.
Wow. That's quite a story.
It really underscores that these key people are often just right there.
Yeah.
In everyday life. The marketplace, the office, university, shops, hospitals.
Wherever people work and relate.
Exactly. Just like Paul, being a tent maker, probably had access to people through his work.
Okay, and the fourth method mentioned.
Forming teams to prepare the way. Laying groundwork ahead of time.
Sending people in advance?
Sort of. The source notes Paul took Aquila and Priscilla with him to Ephesus before his main third journey push into Asia, essentially setting up a base, making connections first.
Okay.
And similarly, Jesus had disciples active in Galilee before his main ministry focus shifted there. Even that miracle he did from a distance for the royal official in Capernaum. The source suggests that might have helped prepare that town for his arrival later.
Interesting. Preheating the oven, so to speak.
Kind of, yeah. There's a vivid modern example from Mostar in Bosnia. A young man and a couple started a small business just selling books.
As a way to connect.
Yeah, a really natural way to meet people in the community. They prepared the ground really well. And within just 1 week of a focused effort, they gathered 75 friends to talk about spiritual things.
75.
In a week. Yeah. A new community formed and started meeting in their home almost immediately. This idea of abundant seed sowing through just natural personal connections, it really prepares the soil.
Okay, now here's something that really struck me from the source material. Potentially a bit counterintuitive. It points out 2 factors that were often unexpected, but actually integral in opening new doors: miracles and suffering.
Yes, that's a powerful combination mentioned. Miracles, well, they're often linked with breakthroughs of faith, right?
Sure.
And the material notes they frequently happen right at the cutting edge where new engagement is happening. There's a modern anecdote about someone's Buddhist friend having shoulder pain and then having a vision of Jesus during prayer and the cane goes, things like that.
Okay, that fits the pattern. But the Philippi story, which the source really highlights, seems to show both happening almost back to back.
It's a classic example. Paul and Silas perform a miracle, right? Delivering the slave girl from that spirit.
Yes, and what happens immediately after?
They get arrested, stripped, beaten severely, thrown into the inner prison. Intense suffering.
Doesn't sound like a great strategy for growth.
You wouldn't think so. But the material points out it was their response while suffering, praying, and singing hymns at midnight.
Right, I remember that part.
Combined with an earthquake, which could be seen as another miraculous element. That whole situation created the opening for the jailer. Him and his entire household became receptive. Their suffering, incredibly, became the catalyst for planting a new community, opening a whole new relational stream in Philippi.
So the insight isn't just that, things always go smoothly. Sometimes the actual difficulties, the opposition,
They can become the surprising means through which new opportunities, new connections are actually made.
wow, okay. And underlying all of this, the focus, the entry strategies, finding key people, even miracles and suffering the source, keeps coming back to one foundational principle.
Being led by the Spirit.
Yes. That seems absolutely central.
The material really emphasizes how the Spirit of Jesus was the driving force, calling them, sending them, directing Paul and his teams,
Their obedience to that leading launched their journeys.
and guided their specific steps. Even when it meant, like we said before, being prevented from going where they planned and being redirected somewhere else, like that crucial crossing over into Macedonia.
So that dependence on the Spirit is presented as absolutely fundamental, both for Jesus' strategy and Paul's expansion.
It's framed as what unlocks those fresh opportunities, what leads them, often, right to those new relational streams that can multiply, even today.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. What do these ancient strategies really teach us today?
Well, I think the methods of Jesus and Paul offer some incredibly practical insights for how we could approach engaging with our own spheres of influence, our neighborhoods, workplaces, cities.
Yeah, whether the goal is sharing ideas or just building stronger connections or trying to initiate some positive change.
It definitely encourages us to be, well, deliberate about it, to look for where there might already be some interest or some natural connections we can follow.
And to prayerfully look for those key individuals, right? The connectors.
Yeah.
The people of peace who can open doors into wider networks.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that, sometimes significant progress can happen really fast through one key person, while other times it requires that more sustained foundational effort, like Paul in Corinth.
And it also broadens our view, maybe, to consider that even challenges or difficulties we face
Might, in ways we don't expect, actually become the catalyst for new openings, new opportunities.
all within that larger context of seeking guidance, being led by the Spirit, as the source puts it. So maybe we can leave you, the listener, with a question to mull over. This comes from the application points in the material.
Think about your own network right now, your colleagues at work, your friends, family, people in your local community.
Can you identify anyone in those relational streams who seems, genuinely open, hospitable, maybe well regarded in their circle, someone others listen to?
Who comes to mind when you think about that? And what might it look like to maybe intentionally connect with them, recognizing how that single connection could potentially open up new opportunities in those circles?
And perhaps thinking bigger, what does it mean for you to be guided, to be led by the Spirit, and how you approach engaging your own district, whatever that looks like for you personally?
Yeah, definitely something to think about as you go about your week.